All right, so today we're really going to dive deep with J. Krishnamurti.
Yeah,
This is a thinker who really challenges like everything we think we know about ourselves.
absolutely. And with all these sources, you've got dialogues, public talks,
Yeah.
even a conversation with Swami Venkatesananda.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing.
It's a lot. And right away, Krishnamurti zeroes in on this whole idea of the illusion of the me.
Right.
And he doesn't beat around the bush. He just comes right out and says, the door is the me through which I have to go. It is not outside of me.
Wow.
Like, whoa, talk
Yeah.
about a reality check.
It's like he's saying forget self-help books.
Yeah.
The self is the problem.
Right. It's like the opposite of what you'd expect.
Yeah, exactly.
So is he saying that this me that's like desperately searching for the perfect solution to its problems, whether it's procrastination or relationship drama,
Yeah.
that me is actually part of the problem itself?
I think that's a really good way to put it.
Man, that is a lot to unpack.
It is.
So where do we even begin to unravel this whole illusion of the me thing?
Well, Krishnamurti points to the nature of thought itself.
Okay.
He's always emphasizing that thought. While it's essential for daily life,
Right.
it's inherently limited. It's
Oh.
rooted in our past experiences, memories, all our baggage.
He even compares thinking to like looking through a piece of smoked glass.
I know, right?
It distorts everything.
It totally distorts our perception of reality.
Yeah.
And this distortion, he says, is a huge source of our suffering. And he gives this powerful example. He says, if I didn't think about tomorrow, there would be no fear.
Wow. Okay, that one hit close to home.
Hmm.
He's talking about how our own thoughts,
I know.
especially worries about the future,
Yes.
they actually create the anxiety we're trying to avoid.
Exactly. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's like my brain is just stuck on this loop of what if, and it's exhausting
It is. It is.
and definitely not peaceful.
No, not at all.
So we're not just talking about abstract philosophy here.
Yeah.
This gets to the heart of how like many of us experience anxiety in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And this is where Krishnamurti's perspective gets really interesting because he doesn't advocate for positive thinking or ignoring problems.
Okay.
He's calling for something way more radical. Quieting the mind. Really quieting the mind to experience reality directly. Without all the filters, preconceived notions, fears,
Okay, yeah.
all of it.
But, he's not afraid to challenge the usual approaches to finding that quiet mind either.
Right.
I mean, he actually says the moment you force it, the mind, it's not quiet, it is dead.
Yeah.
That feels like it contradicts a lot of what we hear about meditation.
It does, doesn't it?
Like, shouldn't there be some effort involved?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But you've hit on a key distinction there with Krishnamurti's thinking.
Yeah.
Because he sees true stillness not as an enforced emptiness,
Okay.
like something you achieve through sheer willpower.
Right.
It's more like a natural state of awareness
Okay.
that arises from really deep self-understanding. So it's less about doing and more about being.
So less about chanting mantras on repeat and more
Yeah.
about cultivating this kind of inner stillness
Yes.
where thoughts can come and go without like sweeping us away in this tide of mental chaos.
Yeah, you could put it that way.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That's a good way to think about it,
I think so too.
especially for those of us who find meditation a bit, shall we say,
Fits a
challenging.
little bit.
But if it's not about mantras or techniques,
Right?
how do we actually cultivate this level of awareness in the middle of, everyday life?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we actually do that?
Where does someone even begin?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because Krishnamurti would say the key is in understanding the very nature and limitations of thought itself.
You mean like we were talking about with fear
Exactly.
and how we tend to get so caught up in those thoughts about the future?
Yes, exactly that. He argues that so much of our suffering comes from this mistaken identification with our thoughts,
Oh, interesting.
this belief that we are our thoughts.
Right.
And as we begin to see those thoughts for what they are, fleeting, impermanent, often repetitive,
Mm-hmm.
it opens up a space for something else to emerge.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Pretty cool, right? And he calls it something else, intelligence.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff.
I know, right?
So what exactly is this intelligence if it's not just our usual way of thinking?
That is a question that I think we need to unpack a bit further.
Right.
But before we get into that, I think it's important to explore how Krishnamurti viewed meditation. Because, trust me, his perspective might surprise you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a little different than you might expect.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It has less to do with techniques and a lot more to do with a completely radical shift in how we understand ourselves and the world.
So we're going beyond like meditation for beginners here.
We are, yeah.
We're going straight into uncharted territory.
We are. You ready?
Let's do it. Okay, so we were saying Krishnamurti's idea of intelligence is key here, but you were also saying that his approach to meditation was
Yeah,
a little bit different than what we usually think of.
it really is. And you're right. He was not a fan of like rigid techniques or rituals or anything like that.
So no like sitting cross-legged and chanting Om for hours on end.
Not exactly. For Krishnamurti, meditation was about cultivating a much more direct perception of reality, a way of seeing things as they actually are, without filtering everything through our preconceived ideas and all of our conditioned responses and all that.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So it's less about like emptying our minds completely and more about just being present with what is like our thoughts, emotions, sensations,
Yes.
all of it, but without getting totally swept away by it all.
Exactly. He uses this really great analogy to describe it. He says, imagine watching a river flow.
Okay.
Our thoughts are like the water, constantly moving, always changing, never the same.
Right.
And our awareness is like the banks of the river,
Right.
providing this stable container for all that flow without actually interfering with it.
I like that. That's a good analogy. It makes this idea of like a quiet mind seem less like this impossible mystical achievement and more like just like a natural state of being, which is kind of reassuring.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's more accessible that way, isn't
It
it?
is, yeah. But if it's not about like specific techniques or whatever, how do we actually cultivate that kind of awareness?
Well, that's the question, right? And honestly, Krishnamurti would be the first one to admit there's no easy answer to that.
Right.
No quick fix.
Yeah.
It really is a lifelong practice of self-observation and inquiry.
Okay, so for someone who wants to like try this out, what would like a Krishnamurtian meditation practice look like in real life?
It could be as simple as just taking a few moments each day
Okay.
to sit quietly and observe your thoughts, but without judging them.
That's okay.
Just notice the patterns, the anxieties, the desires, all of it as it comes up.
Yeah.
But don't get caught up in the stories they're telling you. Just observe them like you might observe clouds passing in the sky.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful. But what about when like our minds are really racing with like a million thoughts a minute?
Right.
How do we stop ourselves from just getting totally carried away?
Well, that's where the real work begins, right?
Yeah.
Krishnamurti talks about how important it is to understand the limitations of thought itself.
Okay.
He really emphasizes that.
So it's like we were saying before about like identifying too closely with our thoughts.
Exactly. He says that so much of our suffering comes from this mistaken identification with our thoughts, this belief that we are our thoughts.
Right, like when I convince myself I'm like the world's worst procrastinator.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because I'm having all these thoughts about putting things off.
Exactly. And as we start to see those thoughts for what they really are, fleeting, impermanent, often repetitive, it creates space for a different kind of intelligence to emerge.
Ah, okay. So we're back to this idea of intelligence.
Exactly.
Can you elaborate on what that actually means in this context? Because it seems like we're talking about something more than just like, book smarts or cleverness or
Yeah, for sure.
street smarts or whatever.
Yeah, Krishnamurti really distinguishes between intelligence, which he saw as a quality of awareness beyond thought, and just intellect or knowledge, which are different.
Okay.
This intelligence he's talking about, it's like this innate capacity for clarity and compassion, for really deep understanding that's already present in all of us.
So it's less about like accumulating information and more about accessing this deeper level of knowing that's already within us.
Exactly. It's like tapping into this wellspring of wisdom that's always available.
Wow.
If we can just quiet the mental chatter enough to hear it.
That's powerful.
It is.
So it sounds like this intelligence is like deeply connected to what he calls the immeasurable.
Precisely.
Yeah.
He even suggests that this intelligence, this different way of knowing, is somehow connected to this immeasurable.
Immeasurable. Okay, now you've really got me curious.
It's a big one, right?
What does he even mean by that, and how does it like relate to our actual everyday experience?
So Krishnamurti uses this term immeasurable to describe a dimension of reality that's beyond thought, beyond language, this vast, boundless space of pure awareness that's always present, it's always there, but it's often totally obscured by all of our thoughts and fears and desires.
Right, all the stuff we were just talking about.
Exactly.
All of that.
So is it like a mystical thing?
He does kind of make it sound mystical, right? Comparing it to, like, the vastness of the sky or the silence after a storm.
Yeah.
But even though it's beyond thought, it's something we can directly experience.
So how do we access something that's beyond thought?
That's the question, isn't it? Krishnamurti would say that the key is, again, understanding the limitations of thought itself.
Okay.
Once we start to see that our thoughts are not the ultimate reality, they're just these fleeting mental events.
Right.
It creates an opening for this immeasurable dimension to actually emerge in our experience.
So it's not something we can, like, think our way into?
No, not really. But something we kind of become aware of as we learn to quiet the mind and just observe.
Exactly. And this is where his teachings about action come in.
Yeah.
Because Krishnamurti didn't believe in withdrawing from the world to pursue some solitary path to enlightenment.
Okay, interesting.
For him, true understanding had to be lived out in the world, in our relationships, in our work, in our everyday actions.
So how does this intelligence, this connection to the immeasurable,
Yeah.
how does it actually show up in our lives?
That is such a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And I think it takes us to the very heart of what Krishnamurti was trying to say.
Okay.
It requires us to really explore what it means to act not from our ego, not from all that conditioning, but from a place of deep understanding and compassion.
Good.
It's about acting not from a sense of separation, but from this really profound recognition that we're interconnected with everything.
That makes sense. But it also sounds incredibly challenging.
It does, doesn't it?
It feels like we're moving beyond just meditation here and into, like, the realm of living a truly awakened life.
Yeah.
And I don't even know where to begin.
You're right. It is a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
And it begins with just this willingness to question everything.
Like what?
Everything.
Uh-huh.
Our beliefs, our assumptions, our very sense of self, all of it.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and it's full of paradoxes, which makes it even more interesting.
Paradoxes like what? Give me an example.
Well, for example, Krishnamurti suggests that true freedom actually comes from understanding our limitations.
Really?
Or that real change happens not through force or effort, but through a much deeper understanding of the way things actually are.
Okay, that does sound kind of paradoxical, but also strangely compelling.
It is, isn't it?
It's like he's challenging us to completely step outside of our usual ways of thinking.
Yes.
And to embrace a whole new way of being in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes his work so relevant even today.
Yeah.
He wasn't offering easy answers or quick fixes.
No.
He was offering a radical invitation to wake up to our full potential as human beings.
So to step into a way of being that's more compassionate, more connected, more fully alive.
Yes, precisely.
It's a powerful vision for sure.
It is.
But it also feels a little bit daunting, to be honest.
It does, it does.
Like, where do we even begin to actually put these ideas into practice?
Right.
How do we bridge the gap between, like, intellectual understanding and actually living from this place of intelligence, of connection to the immeasurable? How do we actually do that?
That's where things get really interesting, and perhaps that's a question that we can explore a bit more deeply.
Okay.
As we delve into Krishnamurti's insights on the nature of the self, consciousness, and what it means to live an awakened life.
Well, you've definitely got my attention. Let's dive in. Okay, so we've been talking around this idea of, like living an awakened life, this life that's rooted in this intelligence that Krishnamurti is always going on about.
Right.
But it's still feeling a little bit, I don't know, like a big mountain to climb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually bridge that gap between, like, the theory and actually, like, living it?
It's interesting you use the word doing, actually, because Krishnamurti would probably say that's part of the trap.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We tend to approach these things like problems to be solved.
Right.
Like tasks to check off our list.
Yeah.
But what he's really pointing at is more of an undoing.
Okay.
Like a letting go of all these structures we build up around ourselves.
So you're talking about the illusion of the me again.
Exactly. Like that feeling of a separate self that's always striving, always seeking, always trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where that famous statement of his comes in. My consciousness is the world, and the consciousness of the world is me.
Wow.
And he's not just talking about some kind of abstract unity here. He's saying that our inner state, our level of awareness, it's inseparable from the state of the world around us.
So it's not about, like, escaping from the world or, like, transcending our problems, but, like, realizing that we are the world and that our actions, even our thoughts, they have this ripple effect.
Yes.
That's kind of profound. And a little terrifying, to be honest.
It is radical, isn't it? And it connects directly to his whole emphasis on living a life that's not all about self-concern.
Okay.
Because if we're constantly caught up in our own little dramas, our own desires, anxieties, all of that,
Right.
it becomes almost impossible to see the interconnectedness of everything.
It's like we're trapped in this hall of mirrors, and we're mistaking our own reflections for, like, actual reality.
Yes.
It's no wonder the world feels so, like, fragmented and chaotic sometimes.
It's true.
But, okay, so if we're the world and the world is us,
Yeah.
then any change that happens within us, within our own consciousness, it has the potential to affect, like, the whole thing.
Yeah. That's the exciting part. Krishnamurti really believed that true social transformation, like real change in the world,
Yeah.
it starts with individual transformation.
Yeah, okay.
It's not about waiting for some external authority to come fix everything. It's about recognizing that each of us has the power to create change from the inside out.
I mean, he even calls for a total revolution, right?
I does. But not the kind with violence and overthrowing governments. He meant more like a revolution in consciousness,
Okay.
a revolution in how we see ourselves in the world.
So he saw that our current systems, the way things are, they're often based on, like, fear and greed and this pursuit of power.
Yes, exactly.
And he believed that the only way to create a truly just and compassionate world is to, like, address the root cause of these problems.
And for him, that root cause was?
The self-centeredness, the way it just seems to, like, pervade so much of human thought and action.
It's true. It's everywhere.
Okay, I'm starting to really see how all of this ties together.
Yeah.
So by quieting the mind, we become more aware of our conditioning,
Yeah.
well, all of our patterns of self-concern, all that stuff. And as we start to see through those patterns, it creates the space for a totally different way of being.
And that's where the intelligence comes in.
There it is again.
Right.
Yeah.
And remember, it's not just about being smart.
Okay.
It's about acting from a place of deep understanding, compassion, and this sense of interconnectedness with everything.
It's about looking at the world and ourselves with completely fresh eyes.
Yes.
Free from all the distortions of our conditioned minds. So it's not about achieving some, like, blissful state of enlightenment where we never experience, like, anger or frustration or self-doubt again.
Right. It's not about being perfectly happy all the time.
More about learning to, like, meet those experiences with a different quality of awareness.
That's such a great way to put it. Krishnamurti was all about radical honesty
Okay.
and self-acceptance.
Yeah.
He wasn't advocating for us to become some idealized versions of ourselves.
Right, right.
It was more about a compassionate and courageous embrace of our full humanity,
Yeah.
flaws, contradictions, the whole shebang.
I love that because, let's be real, none of us are going to achieve, like, perfect enlightenment anytime soon.
Definitely not.
But maybe that's not really the point. Maybe the real journey is learning to relate to ourselves and the world with more kindness,
Yes.
more curiosity.
More openness to just, like, whatever's happening right now.
Beautifully said. I think that's the most powerful message we can take away from Krishnamurti's work. That invitation to wake up to our full potential as human beings.
It's a process, right? Not some finish line we're all racing towards.
Exactly. It's an ongoing journey. And it takes willingness to question everything,
Yeah.
to challenge all of our assumptions, even our most cherished ones, and to cultivate a deep and compassionate awareness of ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, it's a call to action, for sure, but it's also this call to just be present, to be authentic, to embrace all the messy, beautiful complexity of being alive.
Yes, it's about seeing clearly, without all the filters and the shoulds and shouldn'ts.
It's about choosing to act from a place of love, wisdom, and this radical interconnectedness. Exactly. And in a world that often feels so incredibly divided and chaotic, that message feels more important and more hopeful than ever.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of J. Krishnamurti, I hope you, the listener, are left with a sense of possibility. That real change starts within each of us, that we all have the power to create a world that's more just, more compassionate, more awake. And it can happen one thought, one action, one moment of awareness at a time.